Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I'm Tracey Duffy from the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia, and I'd like to share with you how we use the Medical Device Single Audit Program in Australia and a little bit more information about some other reforms when it comes to medical devices that we're currently doing in Australia. So thank you very much. And this is the agenda I've put together for us today. I'm going to take you through some statistics about Mdsap, some pre-market reliance arrangements in Australia, how we use Mdsap in Australia, a little bit about our unique device identification framework, our recalls processes, and as I said, the reforms and what's coming. So hopefully I'll get through all of those. And I did actually get some questions beforehand, so I'll address those questions at the end. Most of you will know what Mdsap is. It's an amazing reliance program. It allows a single audit to occur, and many regulators use that. And the critical thing here is you don't need to be a member of Mdsap to utilise Mdsap. And so that's a really great initiative that any regulator around the world can choose to ask for and utilise the Mdsap certificates, not just those who are members or participating in the formal Mdsap program. In terms of the governance for the program, I know when I came to Korea last year, I quickly noted the governance was around the Regulatory Authority Council. That's the decision-making body of the Mdsap, and it has representatives from 5 countries. You can see there on the screen. I was very humbled and honoured to be the chair of the Council in 2024 and 2025, and I've passed that chairing arrangement now to the US FDA, who is doing an excellent job in their first term of chair. Here is a list of all the members of the Mdsap program. You can see that there are Regulatory Authority Council members, official observers, and affiliate members. And there's obviously other regulatory authorities around the world who utilise Mdsap without being members. And all of this information is on our website. The statistics, we're in the process of releasing new statistics, and we'll release those statistics for the program at the annual forum. The annual forum is scheduled to occur in Kyoto, Japan, on the 15th to the 19th of June this year, and it's being hosted by our colleagues in Japan, the PMDA, and it should be an excellent forum where we focus on the Mdsap program and how we're improving it. And the other thing to note is recently the Regulatory Authority Council accepted 2 new auditing organisation applications. They were from Kiwa and MDC medical device certification. In 2026, going into 2027, those organisations are undertaking a rigorous auditing organisation assessment process that they'll need to complete to become fully authorised to conduct Mdsap audits. And after they're fully authorised, they'll be recognised under the Mdsap program. Information about these 2 new organisations is available on our website as well. And we look forward to seeing the new statistics when they become available to see the growth that Mdsap has experienced in the last 12 months. Australia manages the Mdsap website for the program, and here is a screenshot of the landing page. The new Mdsap.global website has lots of information and documents for you to look at and to review. We modernised the website and we had new branding for Mdsap last year, and the aim was to build recognition and trust in that branding. And we also welcome any feedback on the website and whether or not it can be improved further. So if you take time and have a look at the website and provide some feedback, that would be great as well. In Australia, the Mdsap has been part of our comparable overseas regulator arrangements around since 2018, so quite some time. And in order to use the comparable overseas regulator pathway to supply products in Australia, Manufacturers need product approval from a comparable overseas regulator that we recognise, together with their Mdsap certificate. Our framework is risk-based, and what that means is that even though you might apply to the TGA using this pathway, we can select any application to review in more detail, and we call that an application audit. We published new guidance to clarify what applications we choose and why we select applications, so that there's much more transparency for manufacturers if they are wanting to use this pathway, and it also allows them to plan for the TGA review process if they have a device that is going to be selected for review. That application audit review process and that guidance is available on our website, and we do know that it's being used quite a lot by manufacturers, and it's becoming very, very popular in terms of the pre-market, pre-submission meetings that we have before those applications are submitted. Looking at our statistics, the team pulled out some figures for me, and we received 203 applications from Republic of Korea based manufacturers. You can see here that of those 203 applications, about 14% of the applications to the TGA use Mdsap, and that's been growing. We can also see from this graph that more manufacturers use the European CE certification to supply products into Australia. If we dive more into detail about the Australian market and entering the Australian market, you can see here that the TGA conformity assessment process is also available. You don't have to use comparable overseas regulator certification. You can use the TGA certification. And so a manufacturer can apply to the TGA for the TGA to carry out both the product assessment and the QMS audit, or if the manufacturer has an Mdsap certificate already, this can cover the QMS component of your application, and the TGA would do a conformity assessment of the product component of it. So there's flexibility in how you use Mdsap, and as a regulator, we have flexibility in what we can accept and use as part of our process. Here are the ways that Mdsap is used in Australia when you're using comparable overseas regulator certifications. And you can see here, using Mdsap to enter the Australian market, around 13% of all applications for supplying products in Australia use Mdsap. And we also use the Mdsap audit reports to support our post-market surveillance activities. We look at recent and previous reports to review any non-conformities or issues raised by the assessor. And these are the types of evidence on the screen here that we accept. So Health Canada licenses, US FDA 510Ks, Japan PMDA, and you can see obviously the TGA conformity assessment certificates. There's other evidence that you can use that's also on our website, the European requirements and also Singapore requirements. For Mdsap, the basis is ISO 13485, which you'd all be familiar with. There's also a number of Australian specific elements which are outlined in the Mdsap audit approach document, which covers both pre-market and post-market surveillance requirements. These requirements are outlined on the screen, and further information can be found on our website and also in the audit approach document, the Mdsap audit approach document. And these are some dot points where you do have to pay more attention if you are supplying in Australia, what those requirements are going to be. In Australia, we have two different types of entities. There has to be an Australian sponsor, and there's also a manufacturer, and they could be different organisations, and they could have, and they do have different responsibilities. There's also differences in the record retention requirements for Australia rather than the requirements for other jurisdictions around the world, and the record retention requirements are set by our government. There's procedures for adverse event reporting and managing recalls. There's pre-market requirements, including the declarations of conformity and the evidence of compliance with essential principles. So there's some differences there. And there's an audit product of the product or the process relating to technologies and technical documentation. And they're set out in Annex 1. And Annex 2 sets out the Australian requirements for sterile devices. And there's also differences in managing and reporting substantial changes. So if you're thinking of supplying products to Australia using Mdsap, you have to make sure that you're aware of these differences in your approach and be able to comply with the Mdsap audit approach against these areas for Australia. One of the questions we have quite a lot is, how do we actually support? How do we actively engage in Mdsap? We have a team of people at TGA who work on Mdsap, both here in Canberra, but also they travel and do audits around the world as well. So obviously we're part of the Regulatory Authority Council, which I spoke about earlier. And our involvement is helping develop and shape policy guidance, helping to improve and maintain the Mdsap quality management system that supports the Mdsap program. And we contribute quite heavily to the annual Mdsap forum. And as I mentioned, this year's forum is in Kyoto in Japan. On behalf of the Authority Council, we maintain the website, which I showed you a screenshot of earlier. And we also assess and help manage applications from regulatory authorities who wish to become members, and also from new auditing organisations. So we all have a role to play in looking at those applications and providing our views on whether or not the criteria have been met against the criteria listed on our website and the application forms. Importantly, our staff perform head office and witness audits of auditing organisations. That is the bulk of our travel that we do, where we go out and check and make sure the auditing organisations maintain their capability to do the work that Mdsap requires of them. And those ongoing head office assessments and witness audit assessments is really important to ensure the quality of the Mdsap program. We also engage and assist in the training of auditing organisation staff, and we participate and run annual technical meetings along with our fellow other regulators. We have an annual technical meeting of auditing organisations and their staff, and we meet with all the regulators to go through technical matters that have been identified as challenges or issues throughout the year. And that's how we improve and make sure the program keeps up to date and ensures that all our documentation supports the auditing organisations to do their job. And as I mentioned, all through all of the activities, we're looking for ways to improve. We've got the lead on the Audit Report Improvement Project and helping with that as well. So diving down a little bit deeper in terms of particular projects in Australia, the first one that I wanted to mention was the Unique Device Identification Project. We were cleared for launch last year, and we are going to have compliance start in July of this year. And you can see down at the bottom there that the auditing organisations under Mdsap will be required to check manufacturers comply with the UDI requirements during the audit process. And so we're training and providing advice to auditing organisations on the things that we're wanting to look at through that process. But manufacturers who are supplying in Australia and their compliance date starts this year will be subject to the auditing organisations looking at that labelling requirement. We have a range of documents on the TGA's UDI website. So if you are a manufacturer, either currently supplying to Australia or wishing to supply to Australia, a lot of guidance and information is on our UDI website hub that provides information that will help you understand what our requirements are. We also have a help desk and an email contact if you're not sure. So we're always ready to help and guide people to support their products coming to Australia. And in relation to compliance, different classes of devices will need UDIs at different times. This is similar to the rollout that's happening all around the world, and compliance for high-risk implanted devices starts in July this year. More information, including timing and flowcharts and timing guidance, is available on our website, including if you can't meet the requirements. So if you're not able to meet the requirements during the time period that's specified for your device, there are avenues and pathways to apply to the TGA to continue to provide your device, even though you may not be able to meet the compliance timeframes. So we are able to grant you approval to continue supply in that case. I wanted to quickly flag that our revised recall procedures also commenced last year. We streamlined and clarified our recall processes in Australia. This doesn't change the Mdsap requirements, but these changes will help manufacturers understand our recall requirements here. Our new terminology is outlined in published guidance, and our new procedure is to follow by manufacturers and also sponsors is also published on our website. And you can see here on the screen that we've got a new procedure, new terminology, and we've completely rewritten all of our content. And so whilst the process is largely the same, we've tried to streamline it and make it more easier to understand through terminology. There are three categories of market action in Australia. There's that you have to also think about. There's the class of action, the type of action, how will the problem be fixed, and the level. Who needs to know about this recall? And that's what our whole recall process relies on, being able to answer those questions and making sure you have a good understanding of who's responsible for what part of the process. Here's a list of some of the other medical device reforms that are coming or underway. Electronic IFUs, we're hoping that regulatory amendments will be approved by the government in the next few months. Boundary products, we're doing some work on clarifying those products that might be a medicine or might be a medical device, or maybe a medical device or not a medical device. We're putting in place some instruments to clarify what is a medical device and what will require TGA approval. We've set up a working group to review our process of variations. So any variations or changes to the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, which has all of our devices that are approved for supply in Australia. We're looking at variation processes. We have public consultation that recently occurred on essential principles. We're aiming to align with European essential principles and that we've received. IVD classification and definitions, public consultation was also recently undertaken, and we're reviewing the feedback. Again, conformity assessment procedures, we're reviewing feedback we received from that. And a large part of our work is reviewing our software exclusions and exemptions. For example, digital mental health tools and clinical decision software support and scribes is really a focus for the TGA at the moment. And reviewing patient-matched medical device arrangements at the point of care is a focus for us in the next 12 months. So I did receive some questions before this presentation, so I'll move towards addressing those questions. The first question, the questions are written in blue, but for the ease of clarity, I've summarised it is, this question is about when a manufacturer is using the TGA's comparable overseas regulator framework, Does the TGA verify the presence of a certificate, an Mdsap certificate, or do we review the full Mdsap audit report? And there's some information on the screen there that summarises what I'm about to say. But primarily, we verify the presence of a certificate in conjunction with the appropriate product assessment evidence. So the certificate from Mdsap looks at the QMS, and we also mostly look at the product assessment. But it does depend on the medical device classification. There are some medical devices that we do look at further information, particularly the audit report, if we need that information to make a decision, to provide clarification, or we think that more detailed information is necessary. Our reliance utilises credible overseas product assessment evidence so that we do reduce the duplicative work while still ensuring safety for products. And you can see here that on the screen, we also review the audit reports, particularly for some post-market reviews that we are undertaking to improve and also to feed back to the quality of the Mdsap audit reports. The next question is whether or not if a manufacturer has an Mdsap report, does that reduce the timelines for our processes and the queues and so on? The simple answer is yes, it does, because the TGA has access to all the audit reports, and where the audit report provides sufficient traceable objective evidence, we can perform a desktop assessment of the QMS rather than conducting a full on-site audit, and therefore we reduce the duplication and regulatory burden. So we don't need to do that assessment process again. We do check that critical processes are covered. For example, sterilisation validation where it's needed, supplier controls and other risk critical activities, but the scope of the certificate must also align to the devices supplied into Australia. If the information isn't available, we can request additional information, or we can perform a reduced targeted scope, or we could do a full TGA audit. Or alternatively, we could ask the auditing organisation to perform a special audit to cover any gaps that we might identify. The TGA staff who perform the product assessments do not generally use the Mdsap audit reports. They perform a full independent review of the product assessment. But for QMS, we actually do use it, and where possible, don't duplicate it. The next question was around non-conformities, and it was around major non-conformities. The question was about what needs to be communicated to the Australian sponsor, what action should occur between the manufacturer and the Australian sponsor. The first thing I'll say is 5-day notices are indicators of potentially serious breakdowns in systems, controls that could impact device safety, quality or performance. Therefore, they do require timely regulator awareness and a very well-defined risk response. But depending on the findings, we may require and request urgent corrective actions, we may require additional evidence, or just clarification to ensure that patient and user risks are controlled. We may contact the sponsor if post-market actions are necessary. And unless stipulated in the agreement between the manufacturer and the sponsor, there is no obligation for the manufacturer to notify the sponsor. There are some escalation points. Escalation options include targeted audits, increased surveillance intensity, or we could take regulatory action, which may include compliance interventions. However, we must act decisively in these instances because a grade 4 or 5 is probably a credible risk and the controls need to be effective. The next question was around common deficiencies with manufacturers trying to meet Australian regulatory requirements, and what are the roles and responsibilities between the manufacturer and the Australian sponsor. And you can see the information here on the screen. The manufacturer owns and operates the QMS, including the design and production controls, risk management, technical documentation, CAPAs, complaint handling and change controls. In a high level, the Australian sponsor holds legal obligations in Australia, including ensuring that the device is in the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods and maintaining that entry on the register. They have to be able to provide access to the TGA to evidence on request, and they could need to go back to the manufacturer in some instances. They're responsible for complaint escalation, vigilance reporting, and ensuring regulatory communication and governance are effective. In terms of common sponsor interface non-conformities, we regularly have missing or incomplete agreements between sponsors and manufacturers. The sponsors might not be able to access technical documentation from the manufacturer or provide evidence promptly. There's sometimes ineffective vigilance or adverse event reporting. There's sometimes weak complaint escalation processes, including between the sponsor and the manufacturer. Change notifications are an area that may not be integrated into the change control processes. And what we are also seeing is the misalignment between the information about the device on our register, the declaration of conformity, and what's looked at in the audit. So making sure that there's consistency between all those three things are really important things. So that completes my presentation. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share this information with you, and I wish you all the very best for the rest of your conference and look forward to seeing you again once in Korea, hopefully in a future date. Thank you. Bye-bye.